Picture this: a bustling street corner in New Orleans. A father sits on a weathered stool, strumming his beaten-up guitar with trembling fingers, while his little daughter dances barefoot on the cold pavement, her laughter ringing out like tiny bells. But instead of applause, they're met with sneers. "Get off the street, losers!" someone yells. A camera phone zooms in. Snap! The moment is captured, and the internet turns them into a viral joke. Now, imagine their faces. The father, Marcus, holds back tears as he smiles faintly at his daughter, whispering, "Keep dancing, sweetheart. Don't let them steal your joy." The little girl, Lila, hesitates but twirls again, her feet stumbling but her spirit unbroken. How did they end up here? How does a man with so much love and a little girl with such courage become the target of mockery? What no one knows is that this performance will change their lives forever. Stick around. You're about to uncover a story so gripping, it will shake your soul. Before we dive into Marcus and Lila's incredible journey, let me ask you, have you ever felt underestimated or judged unfairly? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story matters here. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join us on more heartfelt journeys like this one. We bring you tales that inspire, provoke thought, and ignite hope. If Marcus and Lila's story resonates with you, let us know by smashing the like button. Your support fuels our mission to spread positivity and love through storytelling. Now, get ready to witness a narrative so raw and powerful, it will leave you reaching for the tissues. Let's begin. The golden afternoon sun draped the French Quarter of New Orleans in a warm glow, casting long shadows over the bustling cobblestone streets. The neighborhood was alive with the sounds of saxophones, lively chatter, and the occasional bark of a street vendor hawking their goods. Amidst the chaos, a small corner pulsed with a different kind of rhythm, gentle, soulful, and deeply personal. There sat Marcus Lewis, perched on a creaky wooden stool with an old guitar resting against his knee. The instrument, battered and scratched, told stories of countless melodies played over the years. His fingers moved deftly along the strings, coaxing out a tune both melancholic and hopeful. Beside him stood Lila, his 10-year-old daughter, her curly hair bouncing as she twirled and stepped lightly on the pavement. Lila's face radiated joy, her small hands lifting her patched dress as she danced. The few spectators gathered around smiled at the pair's harmony. Music and movement seamlessly intertwined. Some tossed coins and small bills into the weathered guitar case at their feet. "Thank you kindly," Marcus said, nodding to a man who dropped a $5 bill. Ruby Johnson, a stout woman with a welcoming demeanor, stood a few feet away by her food cart. She had been running her beignet stand on this corner for nearly 2 decades, and Marcus and Lila had become as much a part of the scenery as the wrought iron balconies above. Ruby watched them with pride as she sifted powdered sugar over her latest batch of fried dough. "Those two," she muttered to herself, a smile tugging at her lips. "They've got more spirit in their pinkies than most folks have in their whole bodies." As the pair finished their latest song, Ruby waved them over. Marcus rose, his back stiff from hours of sitting, and walked to the cart with Lila skipping beside him. "Miss Ruby," Lila chirped, her voice as sweet as the treats Ruby sold. "Baby girl, you sure were something today," Ruby said, handing her a small paper bag. "Here, some beignets for my favorite dancer." "Thank you." Lila's eyes lit up as she peeked into the bag. Marcus chuckled. "You're spoiling her, Ruby." Ruby gave him a knowing look. "You hush now, Marcus. That girl's got a light in her, and I aim to keep it shining." She lowered her voice, her gaze softening. "How you holding up?" Marcus hesitated. "We're making it," he said finally, his tone careful. Ruby reached across her cart and placed a hand on his arm. "You're doing more than making it. Don't you let those kids out there get to you, hear me?" She nodded toward a group of teenagers loitering nearby, their phones out and their faces twisted in mockery. "Lila's got a gift," Ruby continued, "and so do you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Marcus nodded, the weight of her words settling heavily in his chest. "Thank you, Ruby. That means a lot." The laughter of the teenagers cut through the air like shards of glass. One of them, a boy with a baseball cap turned backward, mimicked Lila's dance, his limbs flailing in exaggerated movements. "Look at me, I'm a superstar," he shouted, drawing chuckles from his friends. Marcus turned back toward his stool, his jaw tightening as he heard the taunts. Lila, still clutching her bag of beignets, slowed her steps. "Bah!" she murmured, her voice trembling. Marcus crouched down to her level and cupped her face in his hands. "Sweetheart, listen to me. Those boys don't matter. They don't know you, and they sure don't know what's in your heart." "But they're laughing at us," she whispered, her brown eyes glistening with tears. "They're laughing because they don't understand," Marcus said gently. "You have something they'll never have, courage. Now, don't let them take that from you." Lila nodded, though her steps were hesitant as she walked back to their corner. Marcus picked up his guitar, strumming a slow, soothing tune. After a moment, Lila began to move again, her feet finding the rhythm and her arms stretching wide as if she could catch the fading sunlight. The teenagers eventually lost interest and wandered off, leaving behind a lingering tension. Marcus sighed, his fingers still plucking softly at the strings. Ruby watched from her cart, her face set in a grim expression. "They don't deserve to see it," she muttered under her breath. "They don't deserve to see the beauty those two bring to this street." That evening, as the streets grew quiet and the lamps flickered on, Marcus and Lila packed up their belongings. The guitar case felt heavier with the few crumpled bills and coins they had earned. Marcus glanced down at Lila, who clung to his hand with one of hers, while the other held the bag of beignets. "You okay, baby?" he asked. Lila looked up at him, her face thoughtful. "I don't understand why they don't like us, Ba. We're just dancing and playing." Marcus paused, crouching down to meet her gaze. "People laugh at what they don't understand. It's easier for them to make fun of something beautiful than to admit they don't have the courage to do it themselves." "Did Mom ever get laughed at?" Lila asked softly. Marcus's heart ached at the mention of Elizabeth. He thought of her vibrant smile and the way she used to sing along to his guitar, her voice weaving effortlessly with the strings. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but she never let it stop her. She'd tell me, 'Marcus, we don't play music for the crowd. We play it for the ones who need it.'" Lila smiled faintly. "I think she'd like my dancing." "She'd love it," Marcus said, his voice catching. "She'd be so proud of you, baby girl." As they walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, Marcus held Lila's hand a little tighter, her quiet determination giving him strength. The walk back to their apartment was a long one. The bustling energy of the French Quarter faded into quieter streets lined with aging buildings, their paint peeling and windows clouded with grime. Marcus carried his guitar case in one hand and held Lila's in the other. She swung the bag of beignets gently as they walked, her earlier smile replaced with a pensive expression. "Ba, do you think we'll always play on the streets?" Lila asked, breaking the silence. Marcus glanced down at her, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I don't know, sweetheart, but as long as we have each other and the music, we'll be okay. That's what matters." "But wouldn't it be nice to play somewhere where people don't laugh?" she asked, her voice trailing off. Marcus stopped walking and knelt beside her, setting down the guitar case. He placed his hands on her shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. "Lila, listen to me. It doesn't matter where we play or what people think. What matters is how we feel when we're making music. Your mom used to tell me that music is our way of showing the world who we are. As long as we do that, we've already won." Lila nodded slowly, though her brows were still furrowed. Their apartment building was a relic of another time, its faded yellow exterior and creaky wooden stairs a reminder of its better days. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew and frying oil, but it was home. Marcus unlocked the door to their one-bedroom unit, and Lila bounded inside, setting the bag of beignets on the small kitchen counter. The room was sparse but clean, with a worn couch that doubled as Marcus's bed, a small table with mismatched chairs, and a corner that Lila had claimed as her own, filled with her drawings and a pair of old ballet slippers. As Marcus set down his guitar case, he watched Lila shuffle over to her corner, picking up one of her drawings. She held it up to him, a stick figure family with 3 figures, a man playing a guitar, a woman singing, and a little girl dancing. "This is us, right?" she asked, holding it carefully. Marcus smiled, though his heart ached. "That's us. And there's your mom, right in the middle, keeping us all in time." Lila's eyes sparkled. "Do you think she'd still sing if she was here?" "She'd never stop," Marcus said, his voice soft. "And she'd love to see you dance. She'd tell you to keep going, no matter what anyone says." Lila placed the drawing back in her corner and pulled on her old ballet slippers. "Can I practice a little?" Marcus nodded, picking up his guitar. "Of course, let's see what you've got." The apartment filled with the familiar rhythm of Marcus's guitar and the sound of Lila's feet tapping against the hardwood floor. It was an imperfect performance. Lila stumbled a few times, and Marcus missed a note here and there, but it was theirs. As the music faded, Lila plopped onto the couch, her cheeks flushed. "Bah, can I ask you something?" "Anything," Marcus replied, leaning his guitar against the wall. "Do you ever miss Mom?" The question hit him like a wave, but he kept his face calm for Lila's sake. "Every day," he said honestly. "She was the best thing that ever happened to me, and she gave me the best thing I could ever ask for. You." Lila smiled shyly, hugging her knees. "I think about her a lot. I wish I could remember more." Marcus's heart ached at her words. Lila had been so young when Elizabeth passed, too young to hold on to more than fleeting memories. But he made sure to keep her spirit alive through their music and stories. "She's still with us, you know," Marcus said after a moment. "Really?" Lila asked, tilting her head. "Every time we play, every time we laugh, every time we keep going, even when it's hard, she's there, watching, smiling, and proud of us both." Lila leaned her head against his arm. "I hope she knows we're trying." "She knows, sweetheart," Marcus said, kissing the top of her head. "She knows." That night, after Lila had fallen asleep, Marcus sat alone at the small kitchen table, the dim bulb above casting a warm but feeble light. He stared at the handful of bills and coins they'd earned that day. It wasn't much, but it would cover another meal, maybe even a new pair of slippers for Lila if he stretched it. He glanced over at the corner where Lila had hung up her drawing. The sight of the stick figure family brought a faint smile to his lips, but it didn't erase the weight he felt in his chest. Elizabeth's voice echoed in his mind, a memory from years ago. "Marcus, you're not just playing for yourself. You're playing for something bigger, for hope, for love, for her." He closed his eyes and let the words sink in. As much as he missed her, he knew she was right. Everything he did, every note he played, was for Lila. And no amount of ridicule or hardship would stop him from giving her the life she deserved. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the small apartment, casting golden streaks across the walls. Lila sat cross-legged on the couch, nibbling on a leftover beignet from the night before. Marcus stood at the sink, rinsing out his coffee mug, the silence between them comfortable but reflective. "Bah," Lila said softly, breaking the quiet. "Can we play that new song today? The one we practiced last night?" Marcus glanced over his shoulder and smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. That's a good one. I think people will like it." Lila nodded, but her face remained clouded with an unspoken worry. She hadn't mentioned the video that had been haunting her thoughts since she'd seen it online. The cruel laughter, the mocking comments, the captions that reduced their performances to a joke. It was all she could think about. As Marcus dried his hands and reached for his guitar case, the door rattled with a sudden knock. He opened it to find Ruby standing there, her usual smile replaced with a look of concern. "Ruby," Marcus greeted her, stepping aside. "Come in." Ruby shook her head, her brow furrowed. "I'll just be a minute. Marcus, have you seen what's going on online?" Marcus stiffened, his hand still on the doorknob. "No, why?" Ruby hesitated, glancing at Lila, who was pretending to focus on her beignet. She lowered her voice. "That video of y'all, it's all over. Folks are saying awful things." Marcus's jaw tightened. He had suspected something was brewing, but hadn't dared to look. "I see," he said evenly. "I brought it up because I didn't want y'all hearing it from someone else," Ruby continued. "But you need to know, it's got hundreds of thousands of views. Some are laughing, but others..." She paused, searching for the right words. "Others ain't so kind." Lila's small voice piped up from the couch. "What are they saying, Miss Ruby?" Ruby looked at Marcus, unsure how to answer. He stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Lila, why don't you grab your shoes? We'll head out soon." Lila hesitated, but the look on her father's face told her not to push. She nodded and disappeared into the bedroom. When the door clicked shut, Marcus turned back to Ruby, his face hard. "What exactly are they saying?" Ruby sighed, lowering her voice further. "They're making fun of her dancing, calling her names. And you, they're saying you're a fool for dragging her into this." Marcus felt the words hit like a punch to the gut. He clenched his fists, trying to steady his breathing. "Thank you for telling me, Ruby." Ruby touched his arm gently. "Marcus, don't let it get to you. Y'all are doing something beautiful, and you can't let those fools tear it down." Marcus nodded, though the weight in his chest grew heavier. "I'll take care of it." The walk to their usual corner was quieter than usual. Lila, sensing the tension, stayed close to Marcus's side. When they arrived, Marcus set up the guitar case and took his seat, but his mind wasn't on the music. The weight of Ruby's words lingered, mixing with his own doubts and fears. As he began to strum, Lila danced with less enthusiasm than usual. Her movements were slower, her feet hesitant. The laughter from the previous day still echoed in her ears, and every glance from a passerby felt like a judgment. Nearby, a group of teenagers gathered again, one of them holding up a phone. "Hey, it's the internet stars!" one of them shouted. The others burst into laughter. Lila froze mid-spin, her arms dropping to her sides. Marcus stopped playing and looked at her, his heart sinking. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "don't listen to them. Look at me." She turned to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Close your eyes," he instructed. "Just listen to the music. It's not about them, it's about us." Slowly, Lila closed her eyes. Marcus began to play again, his fingers moving across the strings with deliberate care. The melody was slow and soothing, wrapping around them like a protective shield. Lila began to move again, her steps small but steady. She let the music guide her, shutting out the snickers and jeers from the crowd. That evening, back in their apartment, the dam broke. "Bah," Lila said, her voice trembling. "I saw the video." I read the comments. Marcus, sitting across the room with his guitar in hand, looked up sharply. "Lila!" "They called me a joke," she continued, tears spilling down her cheeks. "They said I look stupid, and they said you're a bad father for making me do this." Marcus set his guitar down and crossed the room in 2 quick strides. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Lila, listen to me," he said, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "Those people don't know us. They don't know what we've been through or why we do this. All they see is a few seconds of a video. But what we do, it's more than that. It's love. It's hope. It's us." "But why do they hate us?" she sobbed. "They don't hate us," Marcus said firmly. "They're just scared of what they don't understand. And sometimes it's easier for people to laugh than to admit they're wrong." Lila sniffled, her tears slowing. "Do you think Mom would have cared if people laughed at her?" Marcus smiled faintly, his hand brushing a curl from her face. "Not one bit. Your mom was the strongest person I ever knew, and she always said that we don't play music for the crowd. We play it for the ones who need it." "Who needs it?" Lila asked, her voice small. "Maybe it's someone who had a bad day. Maybe it's someone who feels lonely and lost. Or maybe," he added, his voice softening, "it's us." Lila nodded, her tears finally drying. "I'll keep dancing, Ba. For us." Marcus pulled her into a tight hug. "That's my girl." Later that night, after Lila had gone to bed, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table. The weight of the day pressed down on him, and for a moment, he allowed himself to feel the full force of his exhaustion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph of Elizabeth, her radiant smile frozen in time. "I hope I'm doing this right," he murmured. "I hope you'd be proud." He stared at the photo for a long time before placing it back in his pocket. Then he picked up his guitar, his fingers finding a familiar melody. The notes filled the small apartment, soft and steady, carrying with them the promise of another day. The morning air was crisp, the streets of New Orleans already alive with their usual rhythm. But inside a quiet office on the outskirts of the city, Jacob Price sat motionless at his desk, his gaze fixed on the glowing screen of his laptop. The video had been sent to him by an old colleague, a fellow critic who had attached a single scathing caption. "You've got to see this disaster. Can't believe people think this is talent." Jacob hesitated. He had seen his fair share of amateur performances, most of them forgettable. He had built his career as a music critic on sharp observations and unapologetic honesty. But something about the tone of his colleague's message made him curious enough to click play. The screen flickered to life, and there they were, Marcus seated on his battered stool, strumming his guitar, and Lila spinning and twirling on the cold pavement. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable. The guitar was slightly out of tune, the girl's movements unsynchronized at times. But as the video progressed, Jacob's sharp eyes noticed the nuances others had overlooked. The music wasn't flawless, but it was heartfelt. Each note carried a depth that was rare, even among seasoned performers. And the girl, though her steps faltered, there was a determination in her movements, an unshakable joy that radiated beyond the screen. Then, the laughter started. The video's perspective shifted, showing a group of teenagers mocking the duo, their cruel taunts loud enough to drown out the melody. Jacob watched as Lila faltered, her tiny shoulders stiffening under the weight of their ridicule. But then, Marcus leaned in, whispering something to her. Whatever he said seemed to breathe life back into her. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to dance again. Jacob paused the video. He leaned back in his chair, his mind swirling with questions. Who were these two? What had driven them to perform on a street corner, knowing the cruelty of public scrutiny? And why, despite their obvious challenges, did their performance leave him feeling moved? Jacob replayed the video, this time focusing on Marcus's playing. The melody was simple, almost raw, but there was something familiar about it. He closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, and suddenly, a memory surfaced. A small jazz club in Chicago, years ago. Jacob had been a struggling pianist then, trying to make a name for himself. One night, after a particularly disheartening performance, a fellow musician had taken the stage and played a song that had stayed with him ever since. The melody Marcus played was unmistakably similar, though stripped down and worn with age. Jacob opened his eyes, a strange feeling tugging at his chest. Could this man have known that song, or was it a coincidence? He scrolled through the comments under the video. Most were cruel, mocking Lila's dancing or calling Marcus a failed musician. But a few stood out, comments from strangers who had been touched by what they saw. There's something about the way they perform. It feels real. This is what music is supposed to be, raw and emotional. Jacob tapped his pen against the desk, his thoughts racing. He wasn't the type to chase internet sensations, but something about this duo nagged at him. Perhaps it was the memory of that jazz club, or the faint echo of his own struggles as a young artist. Whatever it was, he found himself searching for more information. Later that afternoon, Jacob sat in his car, parked a short distance from the French Quarter. He had tracked down Marcus and Lila's performance spot through the video's geotag. The crowded streets buzzed with life, but his eyes were fixed on the small corner where the duo was supposed to perform. He didn't have to wait long. Marcus arrived first, carrying his guitar case and a small stool. Lila skipped beside him, her curly hair bouncing in the sunlight. She clutched a small paper bag, likely filled with treats from a nearby vendor. Jacob watched as they set up, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. Marcus's face was calm, but lined with weariness, while Lila's movements were animated, though tinged with a nervous energy. They began to play, and once again Jacob was struck by the rawness of their performance. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. He could see the way Marcus poured himself into every note, the way Lila's joy broke through her hesitation as she danced. But the crowd's reaction was mixed. Some stopped to watch, dropping coins into the guitar case, while others smirked or walked away. A group of teenagers lingered nearby, their laughter echoing louder than the music. Jacob's jaw tightened. He had seen enough. When Marcus and Lila finished their set, Jacob approached them. He noticed Marcus stiffen slightly, his hand instinctively moving toward Lila's shoulder, as if to shield her. "You've got talent," Jacob said, his tone blunt. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Thanks, I guess." Jacob pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to Marcus. "My name's Jacob Price. I'm a music critic." Marcus took the card, but didn't look at it. "And what do you want with us?" "I saw your video," Jacob replied. "I think you've got something, but you're wasting it out here." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "We're not wasting anything. This is how we make a living." Jacob crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not saying you don't belong here, but have you ever considered what you could do on a real stage? You've got raw talent, but talent needs the right audience." Before Marcus could respond, Lila spoke up, her voice small but firm. "We don't play for audiences. We play for ourselves." Jacob turned to her, surprised by the conviction in her tone. He crouched slightly, meeting her eyes. "And that's exactly why you're special. But sometimes, the world needs to hear what you have to say. Lila glanced at Marcus, unsure. Her father placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before addressing Jacob. Look, I don't know what you're after, but we're fine where we are. Jacob straightened, slipping his hands into his pockets. You don't have to decide now. But think about it. A chance to share your music with people who will actually listen, not laugh. Isn't that worth considering? He nodded once before walking away, leaving Marcus and Lila standing in the fading light of the afternoon. That night, back in their apartment, Marcus sat at the table, Jacob's card resting in front of him. He stared at it for a long time, his mind wrestling with doubt and curiosity. Ba? Lila's voice broke the silence. He looked up to find her standing in the doorway, her expression thoughtful. Do you think he's right? That we should try playing somewhere else? Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, sweetheart. But what I do know is that wherever we play, as long as we're together, that's enough for me. Lila nodded, but her eyes lingered on the card. Maybe it could be enough for someone else too. Marcus didn't respond, but her words stayed with him long after she'd gone to bed. The next morning, the French Quarter buzzed with its usual energy. The air was thick with the scent of powdered sugar from beignet carts and the sound of saxophones blending with street chatter. Marcus and Lila walked quietly to their usual spot, their guitar case and stool in tow. The sunlight danced on the cobblestones, but the tension in Marcus's shoulders was hard to miss. Bah, Lila said softly, glancing up at him. Are we going to play the new song today? Marcus nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, sweetheart, we'll play it. She hesitated, her small hand tightening around his. Do you think people will like it? Marcus stopped, crouching to her level. You know what your mom always said, don't you? Music isn't about whether people like it. It's about whether it comes from the heart. And I know you've got plenty of that. Lila smiled faintly, but Marcus could see the uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. He took her hand again, and they continued walking. By mid-morning, they had settled into their corner. Marcus tuned his guitar while Lila stretched her arms, preparing for her routine. As the first notes filled the air, a few passers-by stopped to listen. Lila began to dance, her movements small but deliberate, her confidence building with each step. From across the street, Jacob Price leaned against a lamppost, his sharp eyes fixed on the pair. He had returned, not entirely sure why, but compelled by the rawness he'd witnessed the day before. There was something in Marcus's playing and Lila's dancing that had stayed with him, something he couldn't shake. As the music swelled, Jacob stepped forward. When the song ended, he was among the few who clapped. Marcus glanced up, his expression cautious as he recognized Jacob from the day before. You again, Marcus said, his tone neutral but guarded. Here to tell us we're wasting our time? Jacob shook his head. No, I'm here to tell you you're better than this. Lila tilted her head, curious. Better than what? Jacob crouched slightly, meeting her gaze. Better than being laughed at by people who don't understand what you're doing. Marcus stepped forward, his protective instincts flaring. Look, Mr. Price, or whoever you are, I appreciate the interest, but we're fine where we are. Jacob straightened, his expression calm but insistent. Are you? Fine, I mean. Because from what I see, you're pouring your soul into something that deserves to be heard by people who will actually appreciate it. Lila tugged on her father's sleeve. Bah, maybe he's right. Marcus glanced down at her, his brow furrowing. Sweetheart, Jacob interjected, I'm not saying you have to give up performing here, but what if you could do more, reach more people? Isn't that worth considering? Marcus crossed his arms, his voice steady but firm. You think you know what's best for us, huh? Let me guess. You saw our video, got curious, and now you want to play hero? Jacob's jaw tightened. I'm not here to be a hero. I'm here because I see something real in what you're doing. Something rare, but if you're too proud to see that, then maybe I'm wasting my time. The tension hung thick in the air. Lila looked between the two men, her small voice breaking the silence. What would we have to do? Marcus turned to her, startled. Lila, she met his gaze, her expression steady. Bah, what if he's right? What if we could play somewhere else? Somewhere Mom would have been proud of? Marcus's resolve wavered at her words. He exhaled slowly, turning back to Jacob. What exactly are you suggesting? Jacob handed him a card. There's a small venue downtown, a community center. They're hosting a showcase for local talent this weekend. No guarantees, but it's a chance to play in front of people who care about music. If you're interested, call me. Marcus took the card but didn't look at it. We'll think about it. Jacob nodded. That's all I ask. That evening, Marcus and Lila sat at the kitchen table, the card lying between them. Lila stared at it, her fingers tracing the embossed letters of Jacob's name. "Ba, do you think we should go?" she asked. Marcus rubbed his temples, his thoughts a tangled mess. "I don't know, Lila. It's not that simple. What if we mess up? What if they laugh at us, just like they do out here?" Lila tilted her head. "But what if they don't? What if they like us?" Her words hung in the air, a quiet challenge that Marcus couldn't ignore. He sighed, reaching for the card. "All right, we'll give it a shot, but we're doing this together, okay?" Lila beamed. "Okay." The following day, Marcus called Jacob, who sounded genuinely pleased to hear from him. "You won't regret this," Jacob said. "Be at the venue by 7, they'll give you a 15-minute slot." When Marcus hung up, he turned to Lila. "We've got a lot of work to do." They spent the next 2 days rehearsing tirelessly in their small apartment. Marcus refined his playing, adjusting the melodies to complement Lila's movements. Lila practiced her steps until her feet ached, her determination unwavering. On the night of the showcase, Marcus and Lila arrived at the venue, a modest building with a makeshift stage and rows of folding chairs. The audience was small but attentive, a mix of local artists, music lovers, and supportive families. As they waited backstage, Lila fidgeted with her dress. "Ba, I'm nervous." Marcus crouched beside her, his hands steady on her shoulders. "So am I. But remember what Mom used to say? The hardest steps to take are the first ones. After that, you just keep moving." Lila nodded, her confidence bolstered by his words. When it was their turn, they stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding. Marcus adjusted the microphone and began to play, the familiar notes filling the room. Lila closed her eyes, letting the music guide her. Her movements started small, but as the melody grew, so did her confidence. The audience watched in rapt silence, their initial skepticism melting into admiration. By the time Marcus played the final note, the room erupted in applause. Backstage, Jacob met them with a rare smile. "I knew you could do it." Marcus shook his head, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "We're just getting started." The success of the showcase had left a lingering buzz in Marcus's mind, but it also brought with it a gnawing sense of doubt. The applause had been real, the smiles genuine. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that stepping out of the streets and onto a stage might be more than he and Lila could handle. They had always been a duo defined by simplicity, a guitar, a dancer, and a small corner in the bustling French Quarter. Now, the opportunity to grow was staring them in the face, and with it came unfamiliar challenges. The next morning, Marcus and Lila sat at their small kitchen table, the remnants of breakfast scattered between them. Jacob's voice echoed in Marcus's mind from the night before. "You're good, Marcus. But if you want this to work, you have to keep pushing. That means more rehearsals, more challenges, and more risks." "Bah," Lila said, breaking the silence. "Do you think we can do it? Like, really do it?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I think we can try, sweetheart. That's all we can do." Lila nodded thoughtfully. "I think Mom would tell us to go for it." At the mention of Elizabeth, Marcus felt a pang in his chest. He nodded, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. She would. She'd say we've already come too far to stop now. The following week was a whirlwind of preparation. Jacob had arranged for Marcus and Lila to perform at a well-known coffee shop in the city, a stepping stone for many local artists. Unlike the street performances or the showcase, this venue came with expectations. A polished set, rehearsed transitions, and a punctual start. Their small apartment became a rehearsal studio. Marcus played the same melody over and over, adjusting each note until it felt perfect. Lila practiced her steps tirelessly, her feet sore and her muscles aching, but her determination never wavered. One evening, as Marcus played a soft tune on his guitar, Lila paused mid-step. "Bah, do you ever get scared?" Marcus looked up from his guitar, his fingers still resting on the strings. "Scared of what, baby?" "Of messing up, of not being good enough." Marcus set the guitar aside and crossed the room to sit beside her. "All the time. he admitted. "Every time I pick up this guitar, I wonder if I'm good enough. But you know what keeps me going?" Lila shook her head. "You," Marcus said, his voice filled with emotion. "Because when I see you dance, I know that we're not just doing this for us. We're doing it for everyone out there who needs to see something real." Lila's eyes brightened, and she hugged her father tightly. "Then I won't let you down, Ba." "You never could, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice steady. The night of the coffee shop performance arrived. The venue was cozy, with string lights draped across the ceiling and mismatched chairs arranged around small tables. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the hum of quiet conversations. Marcus and Lila arrived early, their equipment in tow. Jacob was already there, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in hand. "You ready?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "As ready as we'll ever be," Marcus replied. Jacob nodded, glancing at Lila. "You're gonna do great, kid." Lila smiled nervously, gripping the strap of her dance bag. When it was their turn to perform, Marcus stepped onto the small stage, adjusting the microphone. Lila stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The room quieted as Marcus began to play, the gentle notes of his guitar filling the air. Lila closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. She took a deep breath and began to move, her steps small at first but growing in confidence as the melody swelled. The audience watched intently, their conversations forgotten. Marcus's fingers moved deftly along the strings, his focus entirely on the music. Lila's movements became more fluid, her arms stretching wide as if reaching for something just out of sight. By the time they finished, the room erupted in applause. Marcus glanced at Lila, his chest swelling with pride as he saw the joy on her face. Backstage, Jacob met them with a rare smile. "That," he said, "was exactly what I knew you were capable of." Marcus shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "We're just trying to keep up." Jacob's expression grew serious. "No, Marcus, you're doing more than that. You're proving that you belong here." Lila beamed. "Ba, did you hear them clap? They really liked us." "I heard," Marcus said, his voice soft but full of pride. "And they weren't just clapping for me, they were clapping for you." That night, as they walked home under the streetlights, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt in years. They still had a long way to go, but for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that they might actually make it. And as Lila skipped ahead, humming the melody they had just played, Marcus felt the faintest whisper of hope stirring in his heart. The invitation came 2 days later. Jacob had secured a spot for Marcus and Lila at a community talent showcase, one that attracted local artists, producers, and a crowd of passionate music lovers. The event was to be held at a small theater downtown, far removed from the bustling chaos of the French Quarter. Marcus stared at the flyer Jacob had handed him, his fingers brushing over the bold print. The idea of performing in front of a seated audience, under stage lights, felt intimidating. It was a far cry from the casual, transient crowds on the street corners. Lila's excitement, however, was infectious. "Bah, it's like a real stage, with lights and everything," she exclaimed, spinning in their small living room. Marcus smiled, her enthusiasm lifting some of the weight off his shoulders. "It's a big deal, sweetheart. We'll have to be ready." Their tiny apartment transformed into a rehearsal space once again. Marcus worked tirelessly on perfecting his playing, adjusting tempos and transitions to complement Lila's movements. One evening, as Lila practiced her spins, she suddenly stumbled, falling onto the floor. "You okay, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, setting his guitar aside and rushing to her side. Lila nodded, though tears welled in her eyes. "I keep messing up. What if I fall on stage?" Marcus knelt beside her, his voice calm. "Then you get back up. That's what makes you stronger. It's not about being perfect, it's about giving it your all." "But what if they laugh at us again?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus's heart ached at her question. He brushed a strand of curly hair from her face and said, "Then we show them why they're wrong. We're not doing this for them, Lila. We're doing it for us, and for your mom. Remember, she always said that music and dance are about sharing our hearts, not proving something to others." Lila nodded, her determination returning. "Okay, Ba, let's try again." The theater was small but charming, with plush seats and warm lighting that cast a golden glow across the room. Backstage, Marcus and Lila waited for their turn, surrounded by other performers, singers, dancers, and spoken-word artists. Lila clung to Marcus's arm, her wide eyes darting around the room. "Bah, they all look so professional." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "So do we, sweetheart. We've worked hard for this. Just remember what we practiced." Nearby, a group of performers whispered among themselves, their voices just loud enough for Marcus to catch snippets. "Is that them? The street performers from that viral video? Yeah, can't believe they're here. What's next, performing at kids' birthday parties?" Marcus's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He glanced at Lila, who had overheard the comments. Her face was pale, her confidence visibly shaken. "Lila," Marcus said softly, crouching down to her level. "Look at me." She turned to him, her eyes brimming with uncertainty. "They don't matter," he said firmly. "The only thing that matters is what we do up there. You've got this, sweetheart. I believe in you." Lila nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. When their names were called, Marcus and Lila stepped onto the stage. The bright lights blinded them momentarily, and the murmur of the audience felt like a heavy weight pressing down. Marcus adjusted the microphone and strummed a few notes to steady himself. Lila stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly as she stared out at the crowd. "Ready?" Marcus whispered. Lila took a deep breath and nodded. The first notes of the song filled the air, soft and deliberate. Marcus's fingers moved across the strings with precision, each note carrying the weight of their journey. Lila closed her eyes, letting the music guide her. She began to move, her steps small but graceful. As the melody grew, so did her confidence. Her arms stretched wide, her feet moving with a rhythm that felt like an extension of Marcus's guitar. The audience watched in silence, their initial skepticism melting into admiration. By the time Marcus reached the crescendo, Lila was spinning across the stage, her movements fluid and free. The final note hung in the air, followed by a beat of silence. Then, the room erupted into applause. Backstage, Marcus and Lila were greeted by Jacob, his face lit with a rare smile. "You two just brought the house down," he said, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. Lila beamed. "Did you hear them clap, Ba? They really liked us." "I heard," Marcus said, his voice soft but full of pride. "And they weren't just clapping for me, they were clapping for you." Jacob nodded. "I think tonight is just the beginning for you two. People saw something real up there, and that's what makes all the difference." Marcus glanced at Lila, who was practically glowing with happiness. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that they might have a future beyond the street corners. That night, back in their apartment, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, his guitar resting against his knee. Lila was curled up on the couch, fast asleep, her face still glowing with the joy of their performance. Marcus stared at a photo of Elizabeth on the table. Her radiant smile seemed to shine back at him, filling the room with a quiet warmth. "We did it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We're doing it." He picked up his guitar and began to play, the soft notes filling the room like a quiet promise. And as the melody carried him into the night, Marcus felt a sense of hope that had been absent for far too long. The week following the showcase was a whirlwind. For the first time, Marcus and Lila weren't just performing for strangers on the street. They were receiving invitations. Small venues, community events, and even a few private gatherings reached out, offering modest compensation, but larger, more appreciative audiences. Each performance brought them closer to something they had never dared to dream of: recognition. But as the days blurred together, Marcus began to notice signs that something was wrong. Lila's boundless energy seemed to falter. Her spins were slower, her steps less certain. "Ba, I'm fine," she insisted one afternoon after stumbling during rehearsal. Marcus stopped playing, his brow furrowed. "Sweetheart, you're not fine. You've been pushing yourself too hard." "I just need to rest," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll be okay by tomorrow." But Marcus couldn't shake the worry gnawing at him. Their next performance was at a neighborhood festival. The crowd was larger than usual, buzzing with excitement, as Marcus and Lila took the small outdoor stage. The bright afternoon sun beat down on them, the heat almost oppressive. Marcus began to play, his fingers moving fluidly across the strings. Lila stepped into the music, her arms stretching wide as she began to dance. The audience watched with rapt attention, their murmurs fading into silence. But halfway through the performance, Marcus noticed something was off. Lila's steps were sluggish, her movements less coordinated. Beads of sweat formed on her brow despite the lightness of her usual dancing. Then, in the middle of a spin, she stumbled and fell. The crowd gasped. Marcus dropped his guitar and rushed to her side, his heart pounding. "Lila, sweetheart, can you hear me?" he said, his voice trembling. Lila's eyes fluttered open, her face pale. "Bah, I'm tired," she whispered. Marcus turned to the crowd, his voice firm despite his panic. "Someone call an ambulance." The sterile white walls of the hospital felt cold and unwelcoming. Marcus sat by Lila's bedside, his hands gripping hers tightly. Her small figure looked even smaller against the stark sheets, an oxygen monitor clipped to her finger. A doctor entered the room, her expression calm but serious. "Mr. Lewis, Lila is dehydrated and exhausted. She's been overexerting herself, and her body just couldn't keep up." Marcus nodded, guilt pressing heavily on his chest. "Is she going to be okay?" "With rest and proper care, yes," the doctor reassured him. "But she needs to take it easy. No dancing or heavy activity for a while." Marcus exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Thank you, doctor." As the doctor left, Marcus turned back to Lila, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Bah," she murmured, her voice weak but steady. "I'm sorry." Marcus's heart clenched. "No, baby, you don't need to be sorry. I should have been paying more attention. This is on me." "But I didn't want to let you down," Lila said, tears pooling in her eyes. "You could never let me down," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "Never. All I want is for you to be happy and healthy. That's what matters most." Lila nodded, her small hand tightening around his. "Okay, Ba, I'll rest." Word of Lila's collapse spread quickly. Ruby was the first to visit, carrying a bag of beignets and her usual warmth. "You scared me half to death, baby girl," Ruby said, sitting by Lila's bed. "You gotta take care of yourself, you hear?" "I will, Miss Ruby," Lila said with a faint smile. Jacob arrived later, his expression unusually somber. "How's she doing?" he asked Marcus. "She'll be fine," Marcus replied, his tone measured. "Just needs rest." Jacob nodded, then turned to Lila. "You gave us all a scare, kid. You're tougher than I thought." Lila smiled weakly. "Thanks, Mr. Price." Jacob glanced at Marcus, his voice low. "If you need anything, you let me know. Don't try to do this on your own." Marcus nodded, his gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. That night, after Lila had fallen asleep, Marcus sat by the window of the hospital room, staring out at the city lights. His guitar rested against the wall, untouched since the festival. He pulled out his wallet, retrieving the worn photo of Elizabeth. Her smile seemed to hold him together, even now. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I'm trying so hard, but I feel like I'm failing her." He paused, his thumb brushing over the edge of the photo. "She's so much like you, Liz. Stubborn, strong, and so full of life. But I don't want her to burn out like this. She deserves better." As he sat in the quiet, a single tear slid down his cheek, but with it came a renewed resolve. He wouldn't let Lila's health or her dreams fall by the wayside. They would move forward, but with care, for her, for Elizabeth. The next morning, Lila woke to find Marcus sitting beside her bed, his guitar in hand. "Ba," she said, her voice groggy. "Are you playing?" "Not yet," Marcus said with a small smile. "But I've been thinking, we're going to slow down for a while. No more pushing ourselves too hard." "But what about the shows?" Lila asked, her brow furrowing. "They can wait," Marcus said firmly. "Right now, we focus on you getting better. Music will always be there, but you're what matters most." Lila nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Okay, Ba." Marcus began to strum a gentle melody, one that Elizabeth used to sing to Lila as a baby. As the notes filled the room, Lila closed her eyes, her breathing steadying. In that moment, Marcus realized that no applause or recognition could ever compare to the quiet strength of their bond. The weeks following Lila's collapse were quieter. Marcus and Lila stayed away from public performances, focusing instead on her recovery. The guitar sat in the corner of their apartment, untouched, while Lila spent her days drawing or reading on the couch. Though the pace of their lives slowed, an undercurrent of restlessness ran through Marcus. He was determined to balance two priorities: giving Lila time to heal and ensuring they didn't lose the momentum they had worked so hard to build. One afternoon, as Marcus was tidying up, a knock at the door broke the silence. He opened it to find Jacob standing there, holding an envelope. "Jacob," Marcus said, surprised. "What brings you here?" Jacob stepped inside, handing him the envelope. "I heard about a showcase that could be your next big step. It's a small concert series downtown, but the audience is full of people who matter. Producers, promoters, and music enthusiasts. They're looking for authentic acts, and you fit the bill." Marcus hesitated, glancing back at Lila, who was curled up with a book on the couch. "Jacob, I don't know if we're ready for that. Lila's still recovering." Jacob's expression softened. "I understand, but this isn't about rushing her. It's about planning for the future. The event's in a few weeks, so you'll have time to prepare. Think it over, Marcus." That evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, the envelope lying in front of him. Inside was a flyer detailing the concert series and a note from Jacob encouraging him to take the leap. "Bah!" Lila's voice broke through his thoughts. He looked up to find her standing in the doorway, her expression curious. "What's that?" Marcus gestured for her to join him. "It's an opportunity, a chance to perform at a concert downtown." Lila's eyes widened. "Really? Are we doing it?" Marcus hesitated. "It's a big commitment, sweetheart. I don't want you to feel pressured. But I feel better now," Lila said quickly. "And I miss dancing, Ba. I want to try." Her words tugged at Marcus's heart. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "All right, but we'll take it slow. Your health comes first." Lila nodded, a determined smile spreading across her face. "Deal." Over the next few weeks, their apartment once again became a rehearsal space. Marcus worked on new arrangements, blending melodies that highlighted both his guitar playing and Lila's dancing. Ruby stopped by often, bringing her usual warmth and treats. One evening, as she watched them rehearse, she clapped her hands in delight. "Y'all are something else," she said, shaking her head. "Marcus, that guitar of yours sounds like it's got a soul." Marcus chuckled. "It's been with me through a lot. I guess it's picked up a few stories along the way." "And Lila," Ruby added, turning to the girl. "Baby, you light up the room when you dance. Don't ever let anyone dim that light." "Thank you, Miss Ruby," Lila said, her cheeks flushing with pride. The night of the concert arrived, and Marcus and Lila stood backstage, peeking out at the audience. The venue was modest but elegant, with soft lighting and rows of chairs filled with attentive listeners. Marcus adjusted his guitar strap, his nerves creeping in. "You ready, sweetheart?" he asked Lila. She nodded, though her hands fidgeted with the hem of her dress. "Are you nervous, Ba?" "Always," Marcus admitted with a small laugh. "But you know what your mom used to say, right? The hardest part is stepping onto the stage. After that, the music takes over." Lila smiled, her shoulders relaxing. "Let's do this." When their names were announced, they stepped onto the stage to polite applause. Marcus took his seat, adjusting the microphone in front of his guitar, while Lila stood to the side, her hands clasped in front of her. Marcus began to play, the soft notes filling the room. The melody was gentle but powerful, weaving a story that needed no words. Lila closed her eyes, letting the music guide her. As the song progressed, her movements grew more confident, her arms stretched wide, her feet moving with precision and grace. The audience leaned forward in their seats, their attention completely captured. By the time the final note faded, the room erupted into applause. After the performance, Marcus and Lila were greeted by several audience members, each one expressing their admiration. Among them was a woman in her late 40s, dressed elegantly, but with a warm smile. "Mr. Lewis, Lila," she began, extending her hand. "My name is Amanda Brooks. I'm a talent scout for a regional music organization. I was incredibly moved by your performance." Marcus shook her hand, his expression cautious. "Thank you. That means a lot." "I'd like to discuss the possibility of working with you," Amanda continued. "We host programs that connect unique talents like yours with broader audiences. I think you'd be a perfect fit." Marcus exchanged a glance with Lila, who looked both excited and nervous. "That's something we'd have to think about," he said carefully. "Of course," Amanda said, handing him her card. "Take your time, but I truly believe you have something special." That night, as they walked home under the city's streetlights, Lila skipped beside Marcus, her joy bubbling over. Bah, did you hear what she said? She thinks we're special. I heard, Marcus said with a smile, though his mind was already turning over the possibilities. Do you think we'll do it? Lila asked, tilting her head. Marcus paused, looking down at her. I think we're just starting to figure out what's possible, sweetheart. But whatever happens, we'll do it together. As they continued walking, the faint strains of a street performer's saxophone drifted through the air. Marcus glanced at Lila, her eyes sparkling with excitement, and felt a warmth settle in his chest. For the first time in a long while, the road ahead didn't feel so uncertain. The days leading up to the charity concert were a blur of rehearsals, preparation, and growing excitement. Amanda Brooks, the talent scout who had approached Marcus and Lila after the concert series, had connected them with a well-known charity event. The event promised to draw a large and diverse audience, with proceeds going to support underprivileged youth programs across New Orleans. For Marcus and Lila, this was their biggest opportunity yet. Are you ready for this, sweetheart? Marcus asked one evening as they practiced in their small apartment. Lila nodded, though her eyes betrayed her nerves. It's a big stage, Ba. Bigger than anything we've done before. Marcus knelt beside her, his voice calm. I know it is. But remember, we're not just playing for a big crowd. We're playing for something bigger, for everyone who's ever been told they couldn't follow their dreams. That includes us. Lila smiled faintly, her confidence slowly returning. The venue for the concert was a grand theater in the heart of the city. Its ornate architecture and velvet curtains a stark contrast to the street corners where Marcus and Lila had started. As they arrived, they were greeted by Amanda, who guided them backstage. You two are going to be amazing, Amanda said, her tone warm and encouraging. Just remember to enjoy the moment. Lila clutched Marcus's hand tightly as they walked through the bustling backstage area, filled with performers, stagehands, and event organizers. The energy was electric, and the sound of a live band warming up on stage only heightened her anticipation. Marcus knelt beside her, his voice steady. We've got this, sweetheart, just like we practiced. When it was their turn, the stage manager ushered them forward. The bright lights of the stage momentarily blinded Marcus and Lila as they stepped into view. The audience was larger than anything they'd ever faced, a sea of faces that stretched to the farthest corners of the theater. Marcus adjusted the microphone, his hands steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. He glanced at Lila, who stood beside him, her head held high. Good evening, Marcus said, his voice resonating through the theater. My name is Marcus Lewis, and this is my daughter, Lila. We'd like to share something close to our hearts with you tonight. The room fell silent as Marcus began to play. The first notes were soft and deliberate, weaving a melody that was both haunting and hopeful. Lila closed her eyes, letting the music guide her as she began to dance. Her movements started small, her arms stretching gracefully as her feet moved lightly across the stage. As the melody grew, so did her confidence, her spins becoming faster, her steps more intricate. The audience watched in awe, their initial curiosity giving way to admiration. By the time Marcus reached the crescendo, Lila was twirling across the stage, her movements a perfect reflection of the music's emotional highs and lows. The final note hung in the air, and for a moment, there was complete silence. Then, as if on cue, the room erupted into applause. Backstage, as Marcus and Lila basked in the success of their performance, a man approached them. He was older, dressed simply, but with an air of quiet dignity. I don't mean to intrude, he began, his voice steady, but I wanted to thank you. Marcus turned to him, surprised. Thank us? For what? The man's eyes glistened with unshed tears. My name is John Turner. I'm a retired teacher and a veteran. A few months ago, I saw you two performing on the street. It was a dark time for me. I'd lost my job, my home, and most of my hope. But your music, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten, the beauty in small moments. Lila stepped closer, her voice soft. You saw us on the street? John nodded, his gaze shifting to her. Yes, and it stayed with me. When I heard you'd be performing here tonight, I knew I had to come. Your music saved me in a way I can't explain. Marcus placed a hand on John's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for sharing that. It means more than you know. No, John said firmly. Thank you for not giving up. As the night continued, Marcus and Lila received countless compliments and words of encouragement from audience members and fellow performers. Amanda approached them with a beaming smile. "You two were incredible," she said. "I've already had several people ask about you. This is just the beginning." Marcus glanced at Lila, who was glowing with happiness. "We're grateful for the opportunity, Amanda, truly." Amanda's smile softened. "You've earned it, and if you're ready, there are more doors waiting to be opened." Later that night, back in their apartment, Marcus and Lila sat on the couch, replaying the events of the evening in their minds. Lila held the program from the concert, her name printed beside Marcus's in elegant lettering. "Bah," she said quietly, "do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Marcus wrapped an arm around her, his voice steady. "I don't think, sweetheart. I know. She's been with us every step of the way, and I know she's smiling right now." Lila leaned against him, her eyes heavy with sleep, but her heart light with joy. "I'm glad we did this, Ba." "So am I, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. As the city settled into the stillness of the night, Marcus picked up his guitar, the familiar weight of it grounding him. He played softly, a melody that spoke of hope, resilience, and love, a melody that carried the promise of more to come. The Grand Theater stood in contrast to the quiet streets where Marcus and Lila had started their journey. The charity concert had marked a turning point, and the applause that night still echoed in Marcus's mind. For the first time, it felt like the world was not just seeing them, but truly hearing them. Yet, for Marcus, success wasn't measured by applause or recognition. It was in the way Lila's confidence blossomed with every performance, how her once hesitant steps now radiated joy. It was in the moments when their music resonated with strangers, turning skeptics into believers. A week later, they decided to return to the French Quarter, not to prove anything, but to honor where it all began. As they set up in their old corner, familiar faces gathered. Ruby was among the first, bringing her warm smile and a bag of freshly fried beignets. "You two've become stars, huh?" Ruby teased, though her voice brimmed with pride. Marcus chuckled. "Not stars, Ruby. Just doing what we love." Lila, now brimming with energy, danced with the same unfiltered passion she'd always had. But this time, the crowd didn't just watch, they felt it. The music, the movements, the story, it all came together, creating something greater than themselves. Among the crowd stood John Turner, the retired teacher and veteran who had once shared how their music had pulled him out of despair. As Marcus strummed the final note, John stepped forward, clapping with tears streaming down his face. "I've seen a lot in my time," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "But what you two bring, it's not just music, it's hope, it's life." His words struck a chord with the crowd, who erupted into applause. Marcus smiled, his heart full, and nodded in gratitude. As the music ended, Ruby stepped forward, handing Lila a small box. "What's this?" Lila asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Open it," Ruby said with a wink. Inside was a delicate necklace with a charm shaped like a music note. "For your courage," Ruby said softly, "and for reminding all of us that the best things in life come from the heart." Lila hugged Ruby tightly. "Thank you, Miss Ruby." Later that night, Marcus and Lila sat together in their small apartment. The guitar rested against the wall, and the room was quiet except for the occasional hum of the city outside. "Bah," Lila said, looking up at Marcus. "Do you think we'll ever stop playing?" Marcus smiled, his eyes warm. "Not as long as there's music in our hearts, sweetheart, and not as long as there's someone out there who needs to hear it." Lila nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think Mom would have been proud of us tonight." Marcus felt the familiar ache of missing Elizabeth, but her memory no longer felt like a wound. It was a light guiding them forward. "She'd be more than proud," Marcus said, his voice steady. "She'd be amazed." Lila smiled, leaning her head against his arm. "I'm glad we kept going." "So am I," Marcus said, wrapping an arm around her. "So am I." The narrator's voice enters, carrying a calm and thoughtful tone. Marcus and Lila's story isn't just about music. It's about love, resilience, and the courage to dream. Their journey from a street corner to a stage teaches us that success isn't defined by where we start, but by how far we're willing to go. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, or share your own story of perseverance. And if you'd like to join us for more heartwarming journeys like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Thank you for being part of this story. Together, let's keep spreading the message of love, hope, and humanity.